want to just say a thank you to Evelyn, who made our nice banner here this morning. If Evelyn sees us later, thank you, Evelyn. So last night I was working on this message. Marlene was working, and as most of you know, I'm a firefighter. The radio went off. Now that's a big struggle. You hear the radio go off, you want to charge out the door, but I wasn't done my job, so I couldn't. But I'm listening to the radio, and it's interesting. This particular call is very interesting how it came in. So callers driving down 22X last night, they saw a grass fire on the south side of 22X. They call in a grass fire. And this is their description. Again, as a firefighter, you're listening to what they say. So they said it's a large grass fire. So for a firefighter, a large grass fire is an area. That's large. So we're talking acres. That means large. For the caller, it meant height. So that's a big difference. So it could be high in the size of this room, and that's not too significant and could be taken care of quickly. Something the size of the golf course on fire is a whole different thing. So I'm listening, large grass fire, and I'm hearing the apparatus that's responding because it's now large. They're calling for backup from other halls, so it sounds like quite a large event. Another caller calls in and says that there's also a structure on fire. So now, in my mind, this massive grass fire is now consuming whatever, a home, a barn, or something. So now it's a structure fire, so now they're adding more equipment. Then another caller comes in and says there's propane tanks involved. So it's like, okay, now this is getting very interesting. So again, the response, I can hear our chief on there asking questions of one of our firefighters who happen to be in the area that's driving on his own. Then a very interesting part is added when another caller calls in and says that the origin of the grass fire was a plane crashed. And I'm thinking, what in the world? Now I'm having a hard time staying at my desk. It's like, whew, they probably need me. Now, this was all from a distance, people driving on 22X, all these deductions have been made. So our firefighters get on scene, and what do we find? There's no grass fire, actually. There was no plane involved, and what we have is we have an RV on fire and there's some trees around it, so it's still something that needs to be taken care of, but certainly not the scene I was picturing in my mind. So what was needed was eyewitnesses on the scene who understood what was going on to give a clear picture. Well, I'm going to suggest this morning that's what we have at the resurrection. We have eyewitnesses who know Jesus giving their personal eyewitness account. So we want to read that this morning in John 20. John 20, we'll be reading verses 1 through 18 this morning. So early on the first day of the week, Sunday morning, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and found that the stone had been rolled away from the entrance. She ran and found Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved. She said, "They've taken the Lord's body out of the tomb," which tells us she did look in, "and we don't know where they've put him." Peter and the other disciple started out for the tomb. They were both running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. I've always wondered why that was added. Did John just want to let us know he's younger and faster? I'm not really sure why that's put in there, but he stooped and looked in and saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he didn't go in. Then Simon Peter arrived and went inside. He also noticed the linen wrappings lying there, while the cloth that had covered Jesus' head was folded up and lying apart from the other wrappings. Then the disciple who had reached the tomb first also went in, and he saw and believed. For until then he still hadn't understood the scriptures that said Jesus must rise from the dead. Then they went home. Mary was standing outside the tomb crying, and as she wept, she stooped and looked in. She saw two white-robed angels, one sitting at the head and the other at the foot of the place where the body of Jesus had been lying. "Dear woman, why are you crying?" the angels asked her. "Because they've taken away my Lord," she replied, "and I don't know where they've put him." She turned to leave and saw someone standing there. It was Jesus, but she didn't recognize him. "Dear woman, why are you crying?" Jesus asked her. "Who are you looking for?" She thought he was the gardener. "Sir, if you've taken him away, please tell me where you've put him, and I'll go and get him." Mary, Jesus said. She turned to him and cried out, Rabboni, which is Hebrew for teacher. Don't cling to me, Jesus said, for I haven't yet ascended to the Father, but go find my brothers and tell them, I'm ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and to your God. Mary Magdalene found the disciples and told them, I've seen the Lord. Then she gave them his message. I'm thankful for you. And as we look at this passage about you, I pray that you, through your Spirit, would speak to us. May we hear your voice. May we be encouraged this morning. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So John tells us that Mary goes to the tomb. Luke tells us there's other women with her and that they were bringing spice to put on Jesus' body. It was an opportunity for them to honor him. There was nothing else left that they could do. He was dead, but they wanted to do something for him. And John tells us that Mary goes early in the morning. In fact, it's so early that it's still dark. Why so early? We know she couldn't go the day before. It's the Sabbath, so she couldn't travel. So it's her first opportunity to come to the tomb. Perhaps they're fearful. It's very clear that the religious leaders wanted Jesus dead. Perhaps they want the followers dead. So there's a good possibility she's coming in the shadow of darkness to come and go before anyone would see her. But she's going with a measure of faith. She's going to a tomb that has a stone rolled in front of it that has soldiers guarding it. So she will go with no way of knowing, how am I going to get in there? How would I be able to do anything when I do get there? So she has some faith. She's not sure how this is going to turn out, but she goes anyway. But to their surprise, the stone is rolled away. Now, again, what would be going through your mind? You're expecting a sealed tomb with soldiers, and you come and the stone is rolled. Now you'd be wondering, what is going on here? Why would the tomb be open? She does look in and sees that Jesus is gone. To say the least that this would be shocking is an understatement. You're grieving, you're expecting to see a closed tomb, hope somehow to get into the tomb, and yet it's open and it's empty. It's like going to a funeral of a loved one and you come to the front of the room and the casket is empty. It's shocking. That is not what you expect when you come in. She doesn't know what's going on. In her mind, the only thing that makes any sense at all is someone has come and taken the body. So Peter and John this would be again news for them that would just get them to jump out of their seats. And they go running back to the tomb. John, again, lets us know he gets there first. But what is going through their mind when they look in? It's empty. What would you be thinking? Most of us would not be thinking that he's alive. We'd be just wondering, where's the body? Who stole him? And why would you steal him? And why would you take the grave cloths off him? Why, if you're going to steal him, why wouldn't you just pick him up and carry him out? Why would you take the time to unwrap him? It's just bizarre. It's bizarre. So there'd be great confusion in their mind. And yet, John does tell us when he sees the cloth laying there, he's remembering what Jesus has said. And in this moment, John believes. Peter, we're not told what he thinks. Mary does not yet believe because she's going to linger there. Now, this isn't the first time that John has mentioned grave clothes or grave cloths in his account of the gospel. Earlier he talked about Lazarus, and Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead. But Lazarus comes out, which he would come out with great difficulty since he is wrapped all the way around, shuffling, hopping. And seriously, how would you come? You're wrapped. And they're told there to take the clothes off him, unwrap him, set him free. But Jesus doesn't need any help. He's already gone. Cloths are still there. So John, all this runs through his mind, and he believes. Now we can relate to Mary's confusion. Like I mentioned earlier, if we were to have a loved one die, they're in a casket and we come 3 days later and they're not in the casket, we're going to be greatly confused, greatly troubled. Like, who would do that to our loved one? Who would dishonor someone's body that way? Now, the difference with Mary, though, is she has seen this before. She's seen or known of Lazarus rising from the dead 4 days later. She is either there or hears of the time when there's a funeral procession and Jesus raises this woman's only son. So it's not that she hasn't seen people raised before. The big difference here is the one who did the raising is Jesus, and he's dead. So how does that work? It's not that she couldn't believe that Jesus couldn't do it, but the one who does it is dead. So she has this tremendous confusion going on in her mind. So the second thing we want to look at this morning is bringing joy out of sorrow. Bringing joy out of sorrow. So Mary looks in again after the disciples had gone in and looked. She looks in and she sees two angels, one sitting at each end. NLT says in white clothing. The literal translation is brilliant white. So she looks into this dark tomb, and here's these two angels in brilliant white. Again, shocking, right? It's quite a morning for her. And they ask her a question that with their understanding makes sense. They know Jesus is alive. They say, "Woman, why are you crying?" Like, this is a good day. This is an exciting day. This is a happy day. Why are you crying? They could go on and ask another question. Why don't you understand? Jesus told you this is going to happen. Like, why don't you understand? But they're not critical. They're not harsh. They understand the difficulty for her to understand this. So she's struggling with this empty tomb. She's struggling with these empty grave clothes laying there. Again, like you say, you'd be asking yourself, they took the body, why would they unwrap it first? Like, nothing makes sense to her in this picture. But she believes somebody had to take it. Now, there are people today who would still see that as the only possible solution. Someone must have taken the body. There's been many today who still believe that is what happened. And as she's leaving, she sees Jesus standing there. He's just in the doorway, just outside the doorway. And in her frame of mind, in all the confusion and in the grief that she's going through, she doesn't recognize him. Perhaps, we know she's crying. Perhaps through her tears, she doesn't see clearly. She's probably not expecting to see him standing there. If we went to a funeral and we went to the front and we'd seen the casket before, and now we go and the casket's empty, and then we look in the doorway and there he is, most of us would not in that moment think that's him standing there. Okay, he must have a twin, must be someone who looks like him. We would not expect the person who was in the casket to be standing right there. That's not what we would expect. Our brain would be having difficulty comprehending that reality. How would that be possible? It might be something that we'd be hoping for, but how would it be possible? She's wondering, she asked him, he's the gardener, thinks he's the gardener, and asks if he took the body, and if he could just tell her, she'll go get it and bring it back. Very difficult for her to probably physically able to do that, but she still thinks it has to be the body was taken, and perhaps this man took it. Now, the ironic thing, it's kind of true. He did move the body out, being his own body, so it's true that he is responsible. And Jesus cuts through her grief and her confusion and the fog in her brain and speaks in a way that she knows it's him. He meets her in the place that she is in her grief and confusion and just simply speaks her name. And when she hears her name said by a familiar voice, in that moment she recognizes that it's him. The voice tells her it's him. I think we all understand what it's like to be in a fog, to be in a distressing time, and to have someone we love and who loves us speak our name. It can cut through the fog, cut through the confusion, and we know who's speaking to us. I can think of times, for Marley and I, just in a time of grief, and the person speaks your name, you don't have to turn around. You don't have to wonder who's speaking. You know who it is. And just the tenderness in the voice, that the person who's speaking to you cares about you. So he says her name to get her attention, to let her know he isn't missing, but he's alive. And her response, finally, is instant joy. Just complete joy. And she calls out what he did, what his standing would be, Rabboni, which is teacher. So she calls out what he did, his ability, he's a teacher. And she clings to him. Now, I don't know, clings like other ladies are at his feet. It doesn't say what, but she clings to him. And understandably, someone you love, he dies, and all of a sudden he's here. You don't want him to go. You don't want him to go away. You want him to stay. She clings to him. But he's leaving, and he tells her not to cling to her. He's going to his Father. And I think there's a sense of that it's more than just don't hang on to me. You can't cling on to who I've been. You can't cling on to me being here. I'm leaving. This point of the journey, this point in my life is coming to an end, and I'm going back to the Father. You can't cling to this situation. We're not recapturing the way things were before. We're moving forward here. And he's more than a teacher. So in her joy, she again goes and tells the disciples. She's a runner in this story. Goes back and tells them. She's no longer talking about his body. Where's the body? That's what you say about someone who's deceased. You call it, we have the body. But now she's talking about the person. She says, I've seen the Lord. I've seen him alive. And she gives him the message which Jesus told her to give them. That Jesus is going to ascend to the Father. In other words, death is finished. Because for Lazarus, when he's raised from the dead, it's only to live for a time and die again. He's still going back, probably in that same tomb. He's going to return. But Jesus is not returning to his tomb. He wants the disciples to know, I'm alive, and I'm not here to live my life and die again. I'm here, this is finished, and I'm going to the Father. The mission is complete. He wants them to know that. Death has been conquered, and he will live forever, not to know death again. The disciples' experience of the risen Jesus is equally life-transforming. They've heard Jesus alive, but a message like this needs to be seen, especially by those who've seen him die. When you've seen him die the way he died on the cross, the way he was beaten, and the broken body at the end, to be like, okay, he's alive, but what does he look like? What state is he in? There might even some of them, Thomas for sure is one of them. Are you sure? Are you sure? I'm going to have to see him myself. And so the disciples still are not completely as far along as Mary, and they're filled with fear. And if we read on into the chapter we're looking at, chapter 20, we read that Sunday evening, again the first day of the week, the disciples were meeting behind locked doors because they're afraid of the Jewish leaders. So they are still afraid. These are not emboldened men yet at this point. That will come. That will come when Jesus gives them his Spirit. But they're in a locked room. They're afraid. They're afraid what happened to Jesus will happen to them. If that's what you do to my leader, what will you do to me? So these men are still in fear. They're in a room where it's locked. They believe they're safe. Now, what happens next would absolutely terrify you in the moment. You're secure, right? Nobody can get in. Everything's locked. You got it good? Everything's good? Yep. No, there's no way they can get in here. And then there he is standing right in front of you. Like, that'd freak you right out. You would scream. Marlene would scream. Or then cry. Some of us would faint. No, not the manly one, right? But some people might faint. But let's try to picture it. If everything was locked here and still some in the room, Thomas for sure in the next encounter believes he's dead. And then He's standing right there. Now, the first thought for some of them is going to be, this is not him in bodily form. This is him in spirit. So Jesus has come to them in spirit. He's going to have a message for them. But flesh and bones, probably not. And Jesus knows that's what they're thinking. Because if we were to flip over to Luke 24:39, this is what Jesus says. This is what Luke tells us he says when he lands into this room. He says, touch me and see. Touch me and see. For the spirit does not have flesh and bones as you see that I have. Jesus then says, peace be with you. Jesus says, come on up. I know this is going to be difficult for you to understand. You have never seen this before. Someone who dies is raised to life, but not just like Lazarus. This is a different body. This is the body that's going to live forever. Come and touch me. Come and make sure. Come and look at the wounds to confirm it's me and not somebody else. And he makes a statement that is the perfect thing that they need. They're full of fear. They've been full of grief. Now they're full of shock when he lands in the room in front of them. And he just says, peace be with you. He just gives the very thing that they don't have at all, which is peace. They're very unsettled, very fearful, and again in shock. And he just speaks what they need to hear. Peace be with you. They have not had any peace since he's been executed. There's been fear, grief, discouragement, worry, hopelessness, all those things, but no peace. They don't have peace. Even today, it's one of the primary things that Jesus would speak to us, is to give us his peace. When things are uncertain, like they certainly have been for a year, there can be times when we're just not sure what's going to happen, where's this going, and the struggles in everybody's life is different, and how it affects jobs and work and relationships, and on it goes. And the one thing that could be missing in your life, or in mine, is peace. That we're just settled, saying, you know what, God's in control. We don't have to understand everything. And if you think you have to understand anything, well, you're going to be greatly disappointed in life, because you cannot. And there's times you're going to have to say, you know what, God's in control. And he gives his peace to me. And since he's the one leading and in control, and I'm just following him, I can go with that. I can trust him in that. Have his peace. Now, he shows them his wounds to convince them, and then they are filled with joy. For the disciples, this is probably the moment. Even though John says he believed, I think it's kind of an intellectual assent. Okay, that's what he said. Okay, I think that's true. But until Jesus is right there in front of them, I think even for John, this is the moment when they fully grasp it. Okay, it's like he said, and then we begin to remember. It's like so many events in life, something happens and then you begin to remember things that the person said. Sometimes it's a bad situation and then you wonder, why didn't I see all those signals, all those signs, all those things start coming back to our mind? Well, for the disciples now, that's the kind of thing to be going, yeah, he said in 3 days. Okay, and they'd be starting to fill in the gaps because now it's happened. And now they can see all the things that Jesus said beforehand that confirmed it's true. Now he'll show up again 8 days later. Now I have no idea what Jesus is doing in between these times. And I'm sure for the disciples that's what you'd be wondering. Okay, he came on this Sunday evening, first day of the week. The next section here says he comes 8 days later. Where was he? What's he be doing? If I were the disciples, I'd be saying, why don't you spend every minute with us until you leave? Like, there's a lot of things we like to ask you. And Jesus obviously has said, I've taught you everything you need to know. And the one who's coming after me, the Spirit, will continue doing that. But he appears again, and he appears to Thomas, because Thomas wasn't there. And Thomas is making the statement, unless I can put my hands in his wounds and in his side, I'm not going to believe. You're going to have to prove it to me, which Jesus, in his grace, does. He comes again. He shows up into the room. Now again, depending on your sense of humor, for me, it'd be like, watch this. When Jesus, they don't know he's coming, but when he shows up again, everybody, if I was in the room, I'd all be turning to Thomas. He's the one who's been saying, you're going to have to prove it to me. And it's like, boom, there he is. Okay, Thomas. Right? You'd be thinking, now it's your turn. This is what happened to us 8 days ago. That's what we're trying to tell you about. Man, all of a sudden, boom, he's right there. And Thomas said, I don't believe that happened. I just can't believe that's true. Well, I'm telling you, all the heads would swing to Thomas. What do you think now, Thomas? And he doesn't need to do the touching. He just says, my Lord and my God. In that moment, he believes, he sees, he knows it's true. Jesus is alive, flesh and blood. And instant joy for Thomas along as with the rest. And he is filled with Jesus' peace and Jesus' joy. Because if this Jesus could do all the things that he did while the disciples were with him, and now, we could get into a lot of deep things here, but now Jesus raises himself from the dead. It's like in other places, Jesus says, the Father raises me. Jesus says in other places, he raises himself. It's God raising the human Jesus. If he can do even that, what limit is there for him? There isn't any. There isn't any. And these men, these disciples and the women will be bold witnesses for Jesus because they know there's nothing stopping this Jesus. The grave can't stop Jesus. Satan in his attempt in the crucifixion could not stop Jesus. So all the powers against Jesus, the religious leaders, the highest up, the demonic powers, everything is thrown at Jesus. And nothing can stop him. And nothing can stop him in the things he wants to do in your life. Nothing can stop him. The only limitation Jesus experiences in your life and mine is always the same. It's the Thomas kind of thing. It's us. It's us saying, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I say and do these things, if that will be the result. I don't know if following Jesus here, I don't know how it's going to turn out. Well, that's the reality. We don't, but he does. And we need to get to the same place as the disciples where we are in our lives at a place of peace because Jesus is in control, and joy because Jesus is in control and he's alive, and he's just demonstrated in rising from the grave what will happen for you and I. Jesus, like we talked about on Friday, speaks on the cross, into your hands, Father, I commit my spirit. So we know in that moment his spirit is going to be with the Father. Same thing that will happen to us. When we die, our spirit will go to be with the Lord. The second resurrection for us when we're risen again, our soul, our spirit will be united with our body to be like Jesus. So you and I don't even need to fear death. The thought of dying, sure, we don't know how we're going to die, and we all have our preferences. Rob and I talked about that actually just yesterday. He wants quick. Most of us would. So the process of dying, is something that we can be concerned about, but not death. We already see what's going to happen. Jesus gives us complete confidence in that. So I want to assure you, like I began this message, I began with a true event that happened last night, that were people from a distance without the knowledge of what was going on, giving what they thought was happening. And it was somewhat true, and some of it, like the plane crashing, I don't know where that came from, but not true at all. But here we have accurate account of witnesses to Jesus' resurrection. People who knew him and would know it is him telling us what happened. Paul in 1 Corinthians, I believe it's 15, verse 5, it's one or the other. You look, you'll find it. He tells over 500 people saw him after he was raised from the dead. Over 500. And Paul challenges people in that text, go ask them yourself, because when it was written, these people were still alive. Most of them are still alive. You can find out for yourself. And John, in his book here, writes the conclusion to why he wrote down everything he did. In John 20, verses 30 and 31, we read John says this of Jesus. The disciples saw Jesus do many other miraculous signs in addition to the ones recorded in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing in him, you will have life simply by the power of his name. You'll have life by the power of his name. Paul, writing in Romans 10:9, talks about the importance of the resurrection. He says, if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. It's that simple for you. But you have to have that part, believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, because if you do not believe that God raised him from the dead, what hope is there? If Jesus just died, well, then we're all just going to die, and there is nothing coming next. So part of your belief in Jesus has to be that God raised him from the dead, and that God will raise you from the dead when your time comes. So the question for all of us, whether you're here this morning, you're listening online, who is Jesus to you? Is he simply a good person? Is he, like Mary said, a teacher? Is that who he is? Or you believe he's the Son of God who rose from the dead? The difference of those things has your eternal state in the balance. If he's just a good person and teacher, there's not much he can do. You can learn some things in this life, sure, but there's no hope for a future. There's no hope for you after death. But if he is the Son of God who was raised from the dead, there's an eternal hope for you. He's the one who has the power to give you eternal life. He has the power to raise you from the dead to live with him forever. So your answer to the question of who is Jesus determines your eternal state. It's the most important question you'll ever be asked. Who is Jesus? And I would conclude that your best option is to trust the witnesses, trust the first-hand accounts, read them for yourself, read Scripture for yourself. And I believe and hope you'd come to the conclusion he is who he said he was, the Son of God who's risen from the dead.